Hi, this is Dave Beatty. I run the Nimitz Encounters channel on YouTube. Recently, I posted a witness interview with an anonymous Navy vet that I labeled as CTO3. Well, Karson, Kammerzell, is the sailor, and he's decided to join me today to talk about the experience. So welcome, Karson.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So, Karson, why did you decide after I posted that video to, what was your reasoning to come forward and come out of anonymity?
Well, the reality is that we're busy human beings. COVID-19 threw everything out of whack, and I had always intended to actually have a direct interview with you, something similar to this. But unfortunately, everything sort of blew up in everybody's worlds, and mine included, and I just could never seem to find a time frame that matched up well enough to make this interview happen until things slowed down, which is about right now.
So it wasn't really because you were concerned about some clearance or defense contractor job or anything like that?
Oh, no. And definitely not because I'm a disinformation agent.
That always gets thrown around. I've been accused of that. I think everybody else has as well. So actually, it's a badge of honor. I think we should get t-shirts that say that on there or something.
Get our own little medals.
Thanks for talking to me.
Absolutely.
So maybe can you just, for the record, tell me a little bit about how you arrived in the Navy and on the Princeton. When did you join the Navy?
I joined the Navy back in 2001, around the midsection of 2001. My boot camp ended just before September 11th, so that was a rather interesting experience. Actually, it ended. We were supposed to ship out, I think, a day before or the day after. And so then everything got locked down and we got held up for a little bit.
And just for the people that don't know, what is a cryptological technician anyways?
Okay, so Cryptologic technician, my official title was Cryptologic Technician Communication, CTO. And eventually CTO was phased out in favor of CTN, which I believe was networking, which was part of the thing that we did with CTO. So my job as a Cryptologic Technician Communication was for telecommunication security with the fleet, primarily.
Okay, so mainly dealing with communications and computer systems. You were in the ship signal exploitation space, and that's different from the Combat Information Center. Can you just describe how they differ?
So the ship's signal exploitation space is essentially what it is on the tin. Everything within that is highly classified to a grade that is essentially a classification greater than what you would see in CIC. So what we did in there is fundamentally different in the sense that we had a much more specialized job section within our fleet operations versus CIC was more of a macro level entity.
I got it. If you tell me, you'd have to kill me. You were actually on the USS Princeton CG-59 in November 2004, and I did check that out. I mean, for the record, you're in the cruise book, and the shipmates that like Gary Voorhees have verified that you were there with them. So, why were you out there that November?
So, for our part, for those of CES, those working within CES, we did not really have a task afforded to us with this exercise. This exercise was essentially as I understood it, a series of exercises built more to coordinate between the Nimitz and combat. And my department, my particular branch, had nothing to do with the actual reason we were out there for training. We were part of the ship, so of course we were out there. It's very similar to bosun's mates going out, even though they don't have anything to do with CIC, with combat or the aircraft or any of the training exercises. They're still on the boat because they're part of the boat. So that was very similar to why we were out there. So we were afforded busy work essentially to do some sort of in-house training amongst ourselves. That was completely separate from the greater reason we were out there. The actual exercise was not really something that we were part of.
And for people that don't know, there's a whole other interview that I did with Karson, but he's not using his name, and I used like a synthesized voice. So, I mean, this whole story really is more in depth in that video. I took some time and edited the whole thing. So, This
Correct.
one
And
is
I would actually like to take a moment to say that for the criticisms leveled towards the anonymous video, towards myself or towards Dave here, that the reality for that coming out the way it did had a lot more to do with an inability to sort of meet up.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, people have asked why it took so long.
Of course.
I wasn't really sitting on it. It was more like I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with it, first of all.
Yeah.
And at that point, I didn't know if you were ever going to talk to me again, or if you were going to actually, have concerns about using your voice and your name. And I mean, legitimately, people have to understand that people do have concerns sometimes.
Oh, of course.
Especially,
Absolutely.
I mean, talking about these topics, in the past, some of the other sailors have been worried about what they could say and what they couldn't say. And almost everybody has always said no one ever told them not to talk about this subject matter with these UFOs or whatever they are. And,
Correct.
And if somebody came to them today and said, hey, guys, stop talking about this, they would shut up. So just so everyone knows.
Absolutely.
And no one's stepping out of bounds there. That's from my understanding.
Correct. In most cases, if people don't know any better in the military, they just don't say anything.
Right.
And that's usually how it goes, because they would much rather not say something than accidentally say something because of the repercussions.
I'm curious, did you contact me or, learn of what I was doing just simply because of the stuff on YouTube, the videos? Is that right?
Yeah, I actually had no idea any of this was going on. It's really interesting. As a CT, everything that I did within the space that I worked in really never left the space, and I kind of just existed. People saw me walking in and out. They knew I was there. They knew I was part of the crew. Nobody ever knew what I did. I didn't talk about what I did, and that was just kind of the day-to-day on that. And it was just accepted that, yep, he's a CT. He's behind that black door. It is what it is,
Mm-hmm.
And it was very easy for me to just take weird stuff and just never talk about it again, and it never bothered me. It was just, that was a thing that was interesting. And it more or less became kind of an occasional fun thing to say at Christmas or Thanksgiving, right? Just like, oh, by the way, this weird thing happened. And that was that.
Mm-hmm.
It just got lumped in with all the other stuff that I never talked about. And it was just kind of par for the course. So over the years, I had no idea that this had blown up. And then around the back end of, I think, 2019, the wonderful YouTube algorithm recommended this Joe Rogan interview with Fravor talking about the UFO. And so I'm like, wait a minute, 2004, Nimitz, that's when I was there. So I started watching this and I was like, that was exactly what I experienced. Right. And I was starting to realize that with these other perspectives, I was not aware there was a contact prior to the video that I'd seen, which was the FLIR footage. And as I was listening to Fravor, I was in agreement with almost everything. And then as I started to really kind of, I guess, nitpick his story as I was trying to kind of fit it into what my experience was, I realized some of the things that he had to say did not line up. And that was when I finally decided, wait a minute, maybe I should say something, because the experiences that my shipmates had mentioned, Voorhees and Turner, for example, was much more in line with the series of events that I recalled. And then Fravor's was kind of kicking those ones off to the side. And there were some very glaringly obvious holes in what he had to say that I could not sit idly by and have anybody, regardless of whether they're a pilot or they have any form of clearance, I don't care who they are, really sit down and just completely dismiss entire sections that genuinely happened. I was there for this, So that's why I finally decided to speak up. And I can't remember who it was, but I mentioned that, hey, I was there on that time in the YouTube comments. And an individual replied to me and said, oh, yeah, so the guy that did this is always looking for more people. And through that sort of breadcrumb is how we ended up getting in contact.
Right.
About a month after I saw the video.
Well, I appreciate you did, because I think that the more people that have one little piece of it that think it's insignificant, for instance, it might correlate with somebody else's recollection. You know, I mean, there's a lot of people that have come forward. Obviously, some of the stories mesh real well. Others are kind of outlying.
Everybody's going to have their own little things that are going to be different. That's just the nature of remembering stuff. But like in the case of my criticisms towards the interview that I saw with Fravor, the things that I disagree with are glaring. It's not a simple matter of, oh, the light was a different color, or, oh, it went left instead of right. These are some seriously glaring holes. And I can't sit there and listen to that and expect, you know, and just think that it's okay that people go thinking that, you know, anybody else that says otherwise is wrong by virtue of, you know, the word of a pilot.
Well, let's talk about it. I mean, you know, obviously, you went in the first interview, you gave me a whole list of bullet points that you had thought through. Of course, you know, which it goes into more depth. But what are some of the highlights that you remember that you just kind of that pointed out to you that were like, wow, that's not right?
So I think it's really important to just state my memories as I recalled them before adding in anybody else's. And so the timeline, in my experience, do understand again that while I was part of CES and I was part of the ship, we were not involved, if at all, in the training exercise that was out there. So what I was doing was essentially just busy work. It was, hey, go sweep this. Hey, do this message, do this thing, and kind of practice amongst yourselves behind closed doors. So my days were just a blur. But the one thing that stands out was this, because it was huge and it was different. And it was not the norm for my day-to-day. And so I recalled one night, I had a night shift. I was on the night section of our shifts. And I would frequently find myself wanting to stretch my legs, bored. You know, there isn't a whole lot to do on an exercise that we're not part of. So I would occasionally walk out of the space and go to combat and see what they were doing. And I did actually see a little bit of criticism about, well, how would he know what's going on in combat? He didn't have need to know. Well, I'll tell you how. I literally walked in and said, hey, what's going on? And they said, oh, there's this thing. And I said, okay, cool. And I walked out. That is exactly what happened. Right. It's not any complex, you know, there was no crazy paperwork. There were no badges. I actually just walked right up the P-way, up the ladder well, into the door, went up to the officer on watch and was like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, oh, there's these things. And I was like, okay, cool. And I went right back to my chair and sat in my space.
So this was going on like as everyone knows, this was going on a week before the actual contact.
As I understand it, it was about 2 weeks. And
right.
And the thing was, so I went in and I asked combat what was going on, just on one of my typical walks super early in the morning, late at night when I was bored, to go kind of see what combat was up to. And the officer on watch at the time, he was like, yeah, so we have these, I noticed that our Aegis was set up to emulate the Gulf. And I thought that was pretty cool. So I was asking him questions about it. And he was like, yeah, and we have these tracks that it pretends various things. It basically creates fictional tracks for us to interact with so that we can practice. Mm-hmm. And he said, but there's this one that is not playing by the rules, right? He said, it's over here, it's over here, it's over here. It's not one of the ones that we created for this simulation. And it keeps bouncing around. And there's no way, you know, it's real because it's jumping from one point to one point to one point to one point all over our map, and nothing can actually do that. Mm-hmm. He goes, so we're pretty sure it's faulty, and we keep deleting it, and it keeps coming back.
Right, and they can tell by looking at it that, oh, these here are these training vectors that are being used because it has
absolutely, yeah, because they tag them with intentional data. They seed these tracks with simulated expectations. Mm-hmm. So the Aegis, for example, would be like, okay, well, it is, you know, this track has been programmed to be like a 747, and it's programmed to be flying at X height, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just a simulation, really and truly. And so you can plug and play your numbers in there, and that's what they were doing.
And your team can react to threats.
Exactly.
But let me ask: is that done? Is an OS or somebody on the ship actually setting that simulation up, or is it done elsewhere in the Navy and via satellite sent down to the ship? Do you know? I mean, I don't even know if that you can tell me, but I'm just curious if someone's standing there. Okay, I'm going to throw in like this, MiG fighter. See what they do.
As I understand it, it was most likely an FC thing. That would be something that Voorhees would have, I would imagine, more information on.
Yeah. I just wondered if someone's...
but I know that it was local. Like, it was something that we could set up within the battle group. It wasn't necessarily something that needed to be brought in. We would probably be given a series of standing orders like, hey, we want you to simulate this kind of an incident from somewhere up top as part of, the Pacific Fleet or something like that.
And the reason I bring it up...
set that up.
The reason I bring it up is there has been some conjecture in the past that, these Tic Tacs were actually fake and that they were injected into the system using this simulation system and they weren't even real tracks. So that's been said.
Oh, before. Okay. Yeah. So that kind of leads into my point about this being an unknown vector within our little training exercise.
Mm-hmm.
The officer on watch said that because it didn't match any of the data that was attributed to our training exercise, and that it also was not real in the sense that it didn't match anything that should be in the area we were operating in at the time, it had to be fake. So they deleted it, and it's just about as simple as you mouse over and click delete, and it's gone. Right? Mm-hmm. It's like tagging something on Google Maps. And so it gets deleted and then it just pops up again. And they know it's the same thing because it has the same unknowns, but it's somewhere that it couldn't possibly have moved if it was a conventional aircraft. It couldn't have made that trip in that amount of time. And it just kept popping up. Mm-hmm. Now, yes, it is very possible for there to be an error that just keeps popping up. And depending on how thorough you want to be, it may stay popping up. How often have you just constantly closed a box on your computer before finally deciding, fine, I'll deal with it, mm-hmm. right? It's very similar. We don't want to shut down an entire system just to get rid of one faulty track. We are just kind of hoping the delete button keeps it gone, mm-hmm. right? And so that's why there's been some criticism about, well, how could it have possibly been going down, been an error for 2 weeks? That doesn't sound right. Well, military tech does that. It's not exactly the greatest. It's good. It has errors. It's super complex. It has errors. It can do fun stuff. It has errors. These happen.
Do you remember when you were staring at it or they pointed at it, was it just a dot at that time, or did you actually witness it yourself maneuvering in a way that you were like, that's weird?
Oh, like within combat?
Yeah, when you were standing there, or was it just a dot? Like they said, that's that thing or something.
I will tell you that the displays that you see in media, at least that I have seen, are not true to life. The Aegis system will have icons, vectors that will be represented by an icon within the system, and it will have the data attributed to that. If you were to, say, interact with that icon, it would then display various information that the Aegis has picked up on that icon. It's kind of similar, really, to like Google Maps, where you would click on something and it would say, "Oh, okay, it's this far away. It's mm-hmm. up this high, or it's down this low." Right? There are other aspects to it, but of course, I wasn't privy to all the really intricate uses of Aegis. I was more an observer and saw mm-hmm. what the few people that were there at the time were doing, or when they would pull up one of the tracks and show me the information on it. So
yeah. And another thing that you brought up before is that the pulse Doppler radar, the SPS 48 and maybe the 49, now these things were confirming the tracks as well, right? They were picking those things up as well?
The one time that I saw that, I went in at night, and this was after the FLIR footage was released. I went in, and I went up to one of the OSs who was manning that station, and we were just talking about miscellaneous stuff and kind of the crazy days that we had been having since the contact had showed up. And he said, "Oh, by the way, this thing right here," and he points to the system, and as the system's pulsing, this green dot lights up. He goes, "That's the thing that we sent the pilots to," and he goes, "Man, they were really kind of freaking out." And I was like,
So
"Huh."
it was still there after the first and second contact.
Oh, absolutely. I actually saw it for about 3 nights visually from the deck of the ship.
So that happened, the best of your
Afterward.
recollection, after.
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, so back to my original point, was going to kind of give the timeline of my perspective. So I went into combat about 2 weeks before the first contact, and I was told that this track was giving them problems. They kept deleting it. And so fast forward 2 weeks, my Divo and my LCPO tell me that they're going to be leaving to go to the Nimitz for a debriefing. And so they go to the Nimitz. When they come back, now at this point, we all kind of knew that there was something going on. We just didn't really know what it was. When he comes back, when my LPO my LCPO and my Divo come back, we were told, okay, this is the thing that's been going on. This is what's been going on. And we got an email on our SIPRNet from our ops officer with an attachment of the FLIR footage video that said, this is what we've been dealing with the last couple days. And so we're watching it, and then I recall being told the story about how at the meeting on the Nimitz, the excuse was falling ice. That was what they were to tell people, that it was falling ice. To which the my LCPO told us, the air boss laughed at the time and said, "Falling ice doesn't act like that." Paraphrasing, of course, he said, "Falling ice doesn't turn 90 degrees and then accelerate 600 miles an hour." That was kind of where that got left. And then after that, I remember going into combat, talking to the OS, who's the one that pointed out the object on the screen. And then I recall having a conversation with one of the bosun's mates who came down from the bridge, and he's like, "Hey, Cammy, do you know what's going on with this thing?" And I was like, not really, dude. I don't know much more than you." He goes, "Well, my deck logs got rewritten." And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah. So I was writing it in the deck logs that I was seeing it at night, and an officer relieved me early. And then when I came up for watch next time, my deck logs were rewritten. It was not my handwriting, and they were rewritten to include nothing of what he had actually written in there." And we just kind of sort of looked around and just sort of left it at that. And from that point on,
that's highly unusual. I mean, I don't think that.
Absolutely. And then
the deck logs are missing, by the way.
It. Yeah, and that's when I had seen it. After that, for about 3 days, that's when I had seen a physical object in the sky that I made the assumption was most likely this object, because it had only been there for about 3 days before disappearing, and its characteristics were not consistent with any of the aircraft that we've been dealing with in the training exercise.
One of the other watch standers in CIC who has come forward anonymously, he was an EW. He also reported seeing it. I don't know if you read his report about seeing the lights on deck. He basically said he got a vector or a direction bearing from radar, went up on the deck to have smoke, and actually saw these objects. No one has ever really been able to kind of gauge the distance. He thought maybe, I think he said it was like 1 to 2 miles or something. I mean, tell us about your sighting, and did it sound similar to what he wrote?
So I didn't see anything white. I did see lights, is what I mean to say. My visual of it, what I saw was much closer than 1 to 2 miles. I mean, unless this thing was like super massive, but I doubt that. What I saw was very, very obviously a triangular formation of lights. There was no mistaking the look of it, and there were 3 lights in a triangle point, I remember when I was looking at it that it looked a lot like the running lights on a helo or any other aircraft, really, with the 2 points on the wing, one on the nose kind of thing, or one on the tail, in that sort of formation, that sort of diamond shape. And I remember thinking, I don't think we're doing operations right now, but also I don't hear anything, I'm like, this thing's like, what is that? I don't hear any sound. And it looked like it was sliding around the sky. Like if you were on the underside of an air hockey table and you just kind of watch it going left, right, up, down. Like it wasn't descending or ascending. It was like sliding around the sky. And it was really, really interesting. But I distinctly remember every time I saw it, I couldn't help but be sort of intrigued by the fact that it made no sound at all.
Right.
I heard nothing. And there's no way it could be any of our aircraft because I would have heard something for sure.
Now, I did a little animation in the other anonymous interview, and you said that could be sort of what I saw. You didn't see any structure behind the lights.
No, unfortunately, no. I only saw the lights. It was dark enough that I was not able to make out anything but the shape of the lights as far as like the sort of the point that it made, which was very much like a triangle.
Mm-hmm. Of course, people say, well, that doesn't look like a Tic Tac shaped white, featureless capsule that Commander Fravor described. How could it have lights in a triangular formation? So maybe this is something else. I mean,
it's possible. That's what I saw.
Yeah.
It's possible that it is different, but at the same time, when you're looking at the FLIR footage, you do see sort of a Tic Tac shaped object, but at the same time, you're seeing it maybe from the back. You're not seeing it from the underside on that FLIR footage. The FLIR footage is also from a much further distance.
You could attach lights to a capsule shaped Tic Tac like object and turn them on at night, and one in the front, two in the back, and it would look that a triangular formation of lights.
Yeah, of course. So I mean, in short of the very fact that I couldn't find any physical structure on it when I was looking at this, all I saw were the lights. Mm-hmm. And the lights formed a triangle, but that could be anything. It could be a triangle on the underside of a circle. Nobody knows.
Right. One question that was raised was, this being a Navy vessel, you're up on the deck and you're seeing something unusual, and at least in your mind, or something that doesn't fit. How come you didn't immediately go in and report this to your CO or something that, hey guys, come out here and you got to check this out. There's something wrong. Why didn't you do that?
Because at this point, everybody knew that this thing was there. And I mean everybody. We had, at that point, when I had seen it physically, we had actually just all decided sort of unanimously to just go about our business. I know that sounds really weird because people not in the military look at that and think that doesn't sound right. But the reality is we were out there for training, and this thing hasn't caused any issues, like any noticeable harm. After our COs and after our divos all kind of did their powwows on the matter, everybody just decided, well, we've got to go back to training. And so that's what we did. There wasn't an official word that said, hey, go back to training. It was just, well, business as usual, because it's not like it's taking anybody off the ship. It's not running around lighting things on fire. It just is. And it's not causing any problems. So I have things to do, right? And so at that point, we had already had this huge discussion. There had already been the CO talking to everybody on the upper end of the chain of command, So these people already knew that this thing was out there. Yeah. It was not, it was almost like an analogy would almost be like a stray cat around your house. You're just like, yeah, okay, it is. Mm-hmm. Right? At first you're like, why is this cat here? And then it just kind of sits around for a few days and you're like, it's not causing any problems. Hey, what's up? And you just go back inside.
Right. So people that would be in the position to take action, they don't seem to be concerned like your commanding officer.
Exactly. Yeah. Because at that point, we'd already done our due diligence of what is this thing? Is it a threat? And at that point, we figured it wasn't anything of those. So, okay, we'll just let it be. Which that does bring up an interesting point, though. Why? See, right. I could not begin to tell you why it was ignored. after that point. It was just kind of like, well, we're going back to training, business as usual. But in hindsight, they didn't know what it was. It was still around for a few days after we'd already kind of decided it wasn't really going to be a problem. Why not go look into it more? Why weren't there more intercepts? Why not? I don't have answers to that.
I mean, to be honest with you, if they knew what it was, then that would provide an answer. That's one answer. Yes, we know what that is, and we're not telling you what it is, but we know what it is. Okay, so
Yeah.
Or on the other hand, think of it like this: if you don't know what it is, it could be Chinese or Russian or something. That would be where you definitely want to find out what it is. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know where anywhere else is. There's either that or that, and
Yeah, and I do recall people on the ship that I did not recognize that were just moving around the ship with people of higher pay grade. I was not directly involved in any of it, so of course it was just sort of like stand to the side, let them move past kind of thing. It didn't look super serious like it was the Men in Black thing running around. These people looked normal. They were not, it wasn't like MIB the movie walking around the ship. But I did recall seeing people that I was like, they're not part of the crew. Who are these guys? Right.
Yeah.
And CES was actually located right next to the guest stateroom for visiting dignitaries or, visiting officers. So they were coming and going from that location. But it was sort of like, well, I don't know what this is. Not my place. Right?
Did you watch Ryan Weigelt's story on my channel?
No, I did not.
Oh, okay. Well, you should go listen to that. He was part of the detachment of Battlecat Helo Squadron, HSL 43, I think, and he said the exact same thing. And he said that his squadron actually ferried these guys around and that they were staying, I forget what he calls it, Admiral's quarters or something. I mean, he says the exact same thing you just told me.
Was that our Helo detachment on the Princeton?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that would be the stateroom is what he's referring to. The stateroom, the guest stateroom.
Right. So what these guys, I believe everybody that there were guys there. Gary Voorhees' statement that they came and took material. We can't, 100% guaranteed that the reason was because of these objects that they were citing and the FLIR footage and the Aegis and, the CEC and the data that was being collected. We can't guarantee that these guys came and took the stuff for that, but it seems highly likely.
Well, when they show up during this event and then they leave after this event, the timeline kind of lines up.
Right. And so that data is somewhere. It must have gone. Of
course it is. Absolutely. They do not, trust me when I say they do not just scrub that stuff and move on with their day. No, we saved more useless data than I think I've ever seen any one entity do in its life. They saved it. Yeah. It's somewhere.
Right,
for sure.
Right. And the radio communications, they took that stuff too. So that would be interesting to hear.
And then again, that's kind of leads into where I have these problems with Fravors' statements.
Yeah. There's some, you pointed out some inconsistencies. He is from day one said that did not happen. He doesn't use names.
He is from day one wrong.
Right. He doesn't use names. So
or hiding something.
He normally talks, I think, about his own experience, like no one took anything from him, which, okay. But
sure.
You don't know if people boarded Princeton and took all of their radar data.
Yeah, and that's something that sort of boils my blood, not going to lie. You can be a pilot all you want. That's great. I'm all for you. Much respect. But you were not on the Princeton. So where do you get off saying you know what happened on the Princeton? You know what happened to these guys when you weren't there. Okay, you were an officer. You were high up in the Black Aces. That's great. You were on the Nimitz. You weren't on the Princeton. Don't act like you know what happened on the Princeton. These are things that happened on my ship. My ship. So I don't want to hear you, no matter how far up the chain of command you are, bash my shipmates on my ship by saying what they saw happen on their ship didn't happen because You got no room to talk, dude. You were on the Nimitz the whole time.
Kevin and Gary both said that they saw objects through the big eyes. And that was in the very beginning of this a year ago. And now, we have your testimony of seeing lights from the deck. The other EW said 15 to 20 people saw lights from the Princeton. This is all Princeton.
People were absolutely talking about it.
And the bridge, the bosun's mate was seeing this stuff. His deck logs were rewritten because he wrote down that he was seeing these objects in the sky, I guess, it's obviously that happened. I totally believe you guys. So no matter what anyone else says, I'm going to say that did happen. I'm not.
Yeah, and see, this is
what they are, but.
No, of course. And see, that's another thing that I want to point out. I don't have a horse in that race. I don't care if it's aliens. I don't care if it's man-made. I'm excited either way. Mm-hmm. I just dislike the idea that there's this one narrative being shoved so hard at the exclusion of every other point of perspective. And that strikes me as incredibly weird, incredibly suspicious. You have histories, just reams and reams of history where the government has hard denied everything and went well out of its way to deny. And you're going to tell me that all of a sudden they're just like, yep, it wasn't a UFO, couldn't be anything else. And just like that, that doesn't look suspicious to people? Just because you want it to be aliens, you're going to write off the fact that they're just so willing to say that it is? I'm not saying that it's not, but when you say that your perspective is the only way something happens and your narrative is so fine-tuned that it excludes any other possible questions, not by answering them, but by making them invalid, I find that to be super suspicious.
Right. I mean, you can be open-minded, skeptical, and kind of open to ideas. If someone is claiming, for instance, in the battle group that, hey, maybe I have a good idea, instead of shutting them down and clamping them down and saying, no, you're lying, and that didn't happen,
And that's what's so interesting about Fravor's denouncement of some of the claims that my shipmates have made. Why denounce that? So Fravor wants people to know that this was a extraterrestrial craft, that it had no possible earthly technology attached to it. Nothing on Earth can behave like that. Okay, great. But my shipmates aren't fighting against that narrative. They're agreeing to it. They're just saying that some other things happened. Well, why deny that? He wasn't on our ship. He wouldn't have known that our stuff had been taken. I mean, unless he ordered it, kind of thing. But I'm not even going to go into that conspiracy theory. But unless he's in the know.
Well, it almost sounds like a story, a framework of a story, and that suddenly some people are coming in from the left field, and that's not part of the story. I mean, that's one possible explanation.
Well, yeah, you only have two real reasons why somebody would do that. Why they would hard push their narrative at the exclusion of all others, even when the other ones support your end point, which is it's extraterrestrial, right? The only reasons you would do it is either you don't want anybody else having any of the spotlight, or you don't want anybody else to question any facet of the narrative that you're pushing. That's the only thing that I can come up with, is either he wants all the glory, or there's something involved with those finer details that he doesn't want people to believe happened that would either discredit his narrative or lead to a different direction, which I guess would also just discredit the narrative. Those are the only two solutions I can come up with.
Right. Well, unless, I don't know that we're going to find the answer to that. I'm not sure if we ever will.
Maybe not.
One question. People have continually said the Navy will never or would never test a advanced secret platform, say an aerospace vehicle, an advanced aerospace vehicle, on their own battle group without everybody knowing that it's a test, that it's unsafe, an air hazard. They wouldn't do it. The pilots would know, all the ships would know.
And I bet you anything, those are the same people that would turn around and say, well, if you don't have the need to know, then you wouldn't know. right?
So, I mean, in your experience,
No,
that's possible then.
that's absolutely possible. Our ship alone was compartmentalized, left, right, and center. The people in CIC had no idea what I was doing in CES. I didn't fully know everything that was going on in CIC, but my clearance allowed me access to the room, and the officers were nice enough to tell me what was going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, if the military wants to hide something from you, it's getting hidden. And that's just how it goes. They partition information all the time. All the time. There's a reason why it isn't enough to just have a security clearance. You also have need to know. A bosun's mate doesn't need to know that there's some test platform flying around. The Princeton doesn't need to know that there's a test platform flying around.
Right.
Maybe the Black Aces do because they are flying around, but that's about it. And my stance on this hypothesis that it could have been a test platform for something is the fact that why would you test it on your own people without making them aware? Well, for starters, there was no weapons involved in this test. It seemed to be, if it was a test, it was purely to gauge reaction and possibly Aegis data, because they pulled the data. They took our data. They took our reactions. That's all that disappeared. Our written reactions and our recorded reactions. That's everything that disappeared. That's incredibly convenient to me. You have one of the best, arguably the most state-of-the-art radar systems on the planet in the Aegis. If you're going to test something to see how well it stands up to technology on the planet, you're going to test it against the best. And if the best is your stuff, you're testing it against your stuff.
If I was going to run a test, I would probably want to do it in a scenario where very, very few people knew it was happening, but some do. But they're not the ones that are reacting, for instance, the captain or the admiral, for instance. But the people that are running the sensors are not aware that it's a test, so that they can be judged on their own reaction to something that is...
Yeah, so that they could have a genuine reaction.
Yeah.
Here's a great example for that, okay? The movie Alien, the very first movie Alien, the director only told the actor that would have the alien burst from his chest what was going to happen. He told none of the other actors, like Sigourney Weaver, none of them knew that the alien was going to come bursting out of his chest. So the reaction that you get in the video, in the actual movie, is 100% authentic. They were that shocked that this was happening.
I didn't know that. That's funny.
Yeah, and so that's exactly what you want if you're trying to gauge the reaction to something. If you want to know how the best, most equipped military handles an unknown like that, you don't want to tell them it's coming. You want authentic reactions. You want to see how it happens in real time. So telling people ahead of time to anticipate it is tainting the result, right?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree that it's possible that a test was done without the knowledge of many of the witnesses. So,
yeah, if it was a test, that would be a great condition to put it through.
Well, let me ask you this, because then that begs the question: how could we possess technology that exhibited the behavior that this thing allegedly did? That's the main argument, that it could not be ours.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. But at the same time, we have a history of underestimating our technology. We have a huge, huge history of people below the classification, below the need to know, below the involvement, right? Outside of the involvement, that's the smaller, tighter circles of research and development. There's no way it could do that. There's no way that could possibly happen. There was no way people could build the pyramids. And then someone was like, what if they used rolling logs? And then everybody was like, maybe that's how it was done. Right? There's no way the SR-71 Blackbird could have possibly existed. And then it did. And everybody was like, oh, yeah. Okay. Right? There's no way we could have gone to the moon, which is his own bag of worms. But, there's all these instances in history of there being no possible way mankind could have done this thing. And then somebody later down the road goes, well, actually. And then they're like, you know what? Maybe they could have. So I don't buy that for a second.
Well, and you brought up the SR-71, and, I think spy aircraft are some of the most highly classified, sensitive information. So if indeed you're testing some type of stealthy spy craft that maybe submarine launched, drone thing, it's going to be clamped down. I don't think that anyone's going to be wise to what this technology is. You know what I mean? I mean, I think even back in 2004,
because leaks happen all the time from sources you would always think are secure, is almost always how it goes down. Weird information gets out. Things get leaked to people. There's tons of technology that we tested, found were not all that great, but still keep it super hidden because we don't want anybody else to do it better.
Well, I mean, now what do you think about 2015? Suddenly we have the same types of videos, FLIR videos being brought together with the 2004 and conflated into one thing back in 2017 with the New York Times. If you look at that case and reflect on that, do you think that it's the same, like a progression of the same type of thing? It's surprisingly similar in that all you're given is a pilot statement and a FLIR video, and the pilots are saying it's a UFO. I mean, pretty much it's the exact same narrative. And in that case, there's been very, very few peripheral witnesses like there was with the Nimitz event. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe they learned maybe they were told not to talk. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's really interesting that all this kicked off. It seems to have all kicked off from the 2004 incident, right? Now, all of a sudden, the Pentagon's totally cool about releasing video footage of Tic Tac shaped things that eerily look similar to the 2004 one, right? All of a sudden, it's fine. It's totally a UFO, guys. It couldn't be anything else, right? And again, I'm not saying it isn't extraterrestrial, but I am saying it's highly suspicious that they are so keen on pushing extraterrestrial narrative on this thing that it makes me go, wait a second, that's not what we normally do for anything. We normally try really hard to hide it. It doesn't matter what it is.
Well, I mean, with the whole this UAP task force that the DoD has set up and established that's supposed to be looking at this and, potentially moving forward, I think Senator Rubio put some legislation in a bill that would actually try to get some of this information from this task force brought forward to the public. I mean, as the next year comes rolling around, it'd be interesting to see what comes out of that. Because if you listen to the lawmakers and the military and believe them, they're saying, okay, yeah, these are UFOs. We have no idea what they are. And that includes the Nimitz stuff and the Roosevelt stuff. And the pilots are absolutely 100% truthful in what they observed.
Oh, of course. You've pretty much created the perfect hiding zone for any aerial test platform that you would ever want. It's perfect. It's airtight because all you have to do is just say aliens, and then it does it. Then it literally does its own work. Look at all of the YouTube comments that are hell bent on fighting back against any claim that it couldn't be. It does its own work for you. It spins its own narrative. You literally just say aliens, and it goes. And again, I'm not saying it's not. I just think it's really convenient that now the government wants this program to go chase these aliens, because now any video that it puts out, it could say is aliens. It could say is a UFO. It could say is extraterrestrial. It could say it's not our aircraft. And even if it is our aircraft, well, they get to make the first move. It's no longer a surprise that the military has to suddenly have to cover up. They get to say, okay, we'll just leak this little photo out here. We'll send this little video out here and say, look, another Tic Tac. And everybody's going to do all the cover up for them. And that'll be it.
The other flip side to it is, oh, well, of course we have the Roswell UFO crash that we have acquired and reverse engineered and created our own advanced anti-gravity spaceships now that we're hiding. And for instance, people point to me, they say, Dave, what about the Navy patents? The Navy patents by Salvador Pace, the mass reduction generator, and
I saw those.
And so they point to that and say, oh, look at this. This is real Navy technology that's being developed.
Well, I do think it's very intriguing that it's a triangle. I've always thought that was a very interesting coincidence, considering that the lights I saw were triangular. That's just really hard to kind of group into the same. Like, I feel like you're really grasping at straws to make that connection, but it is still worth at least keeping in the back of your mind that you have these patents and then you have this task force, and if they want to hide tests on something like that patent,
Mm-hmm.
all they have to do is say, hey, look at our newest UFO footage, and then no one will ever question that it's man-made.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They'll be so quick to want it to be aliens that it will drown out any other actual discourse on the matter, any other possible objective reasoning behind it.
Well, I think at the highest level, any discussion in the news media at the highest levels of news media where this has been reported, from the New York Times to the Washington Post and so on, those comments and experts always support the idea that this is definitely not our technology. They push hard on that we have inside information, we have access to the highest levels of the military, and we are telling the American people that this is not our technology. They represent unknown craft. We don't know where they came from. They're probably not our adversaries. We don't. That is the what's coming out at the highest level. So not necessarily the spokesperson from the Pentagon saying that, but some of these ex government officials from To the Stars and so on. That the show Unidentified. That is what is being projected. I mean, you and I just here have brought up some pretty interesting ideas, and I don't think you can reject the idea that this could be some compartmentalized project.
It's
that
just
should always be on the table,
It's such a thorough push for the extraterrestrial narrative.
Right.
I'm actually pretty impressed that it feels like for the first time in the history of my experience with the government, they're all on the same page.
Yeah.
But that's part of what makes it so weird to me, is that the only people that are really shoving this narrative super hard are people that don't typically like to have questions on anything else.
Well,
they don't want to entertain any other explanation.
You have to realize that it is an unknown, the UAP, the unidentified aerial phenomenon. So they don't necessarily push the ET hypothesis, but
True.
You're basically saying that it's a mystery. This is unknown. It's not ours. It's not other countries. So people immediately think, okay, we know what you're talking about here. I mean, you're not saying alien, but that's what you're leading us to believe.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, well, there's just so many other questions that you can ask about these situations that aren't getting asked just because it's extraterrestrial or bust when it comes to narratives like Fravier's pushing. Right.
Well, and to be fair, I mean, people say, well, hey, CTO3, Karson, these are just his opinions. And, that's
they are.
Well, that's right. That's what I've told everybody. I said, when they were criticizing him, like, yeah, well, he was on the deck. He saw this. He saw the radar. That's his part of the story. But he also has some intelligence and has thought about it, and here's some ideas. So you can't immediately disparage somebody just because they have some ideas. Yeah, maybe not your expertise on the Princeton leads you to be an expert on coming up with a theory of what this all means, but why not? I mean, I'm willing to listen to it. I have my own theory.
The reality is that some people want this narrative so badly in their heads that they will absolutely find any reason to discredit anything that causes them to think otherwise or question it.
Right.
And that's actually part of the reason why I say it's so convenient that this task force exists, because those are kind of the sort of minds that you're banking on hiding everything for you so you don't have to do all the work. They're not going to ask questions. They're going to hang on your every word. That's exactly what you want if you want anybody to believe your statement. Those are the exact people you look for.
Well, I appreciate you talking to me today. I think we can carry on this conversation moving forward if more questions come up. And, let me ask you, I mean, aside from the stuff that's gone on in 2004, have you ever thought about, extraterrestrials or UFOs? And what was your feeling about those before all this?
It's really much the same. I genuinely don't think that it's as frequent as people may want it to be when it comes to whether we've been visited by extraterrestrial life or not. I think that there have been too many instances of our own ingenuity being brushed aside in favor of sort of downplaying our capabilities as humans, just to say that it had to be aliens. Like I mentioned with the pyramids or the SR-71, there's a lot of things that people will immediately write off because there's no way we're that smart. There's no way humans are that great.
Mm-hmm.
And then we find out otherwise.
Well,
I think that my biggest issue with the UFO narratives is that it really downplays the ingenuity that we as people have and our ability to craft crazy, amazing stuff with our own hands, as opposed to it has to be reverse engineered from a more advanced species. Give humanity more credit, people. We can do some pretty amazing, crazy stuff.
Well, Karson, I appreciate you talking to me today, and we'll carry on.
Absolutely.
If you or someone you know has witnessed unknown objects from military ships or planes, please contact us at the address on your screen. You can remain anonymous.